Hello, everyone, and welcome. Now, for UK companies, UK is a nice market. Europe's a nice market, but the big banana is the US. And we all think about, including SeedLegals, about incorporating possibly in the US, but certainly starting to sell to customers in the US. Now, one of the key things that it is said is that, of course, when you want to start selling in the US, you start building up a team in the US. And the first hire you make in the US is a marketing person. And then later on, you realize the only thing that person could market is themselves. And why? Because here in the UK, people are a bit more modest. They, they're not as effusive. And so when you meet people in the US and they're selling themselves, it's awesome. We're going to be huge. It's going to be amazing. And you buy into the hype, and then you discover actually they're not delivering. So today, we're going to hear the tips, the secrets, all the things to do and not to do so that you can scale and sell in the US from the experts. So, Tom, over to you.
Thank you so much, Anthony. Yeah, and your story about marketers being able to just sell themselves resonated with me. I have definitely had that experience. So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this session on market expansion, with the focus being on expansion to the US. I'm Tom Glasson. I've spent about 20 years, I think now, in B2B tech, a decade of that time as a senior go-to-market leader within VC-backed SaaS companies, both in the UK and, of course, in the US. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of my battle scars and probably my hair loss has come from trying to conquer the US market. So I'm really glad SeedLegals and Anthony have given me the opportunity to share some of my lessons learned with you today. I'm also the founder of a UK arm of a community called Pavilion, previously known as Revenue Collective. Some of you might have come across that. It's now the largest community in the world for go-to-market leaders. And then finally, about 4 years ago, I moved from being a full-time revenue leader to a CEO when I co-founded ScaleWise with my good friend, Gavin, and also my wife. And we exist to give B2B tech companies flexible access to a community of world-class go-to-market talent to help them accelerate growth. And we've onboarded about 350 experienced operators, and our clients essentially tap into that expertise on a flexible basis to help them quickly solve any go-to-market challenge that they might be facing. So if you'd like to learn more about what we do, or you'd like a free assessment of your go-to-market strategy and plans, you can email me at tom@scalewise.com. I will finish the sales pitch there. And without further ado, let's get started with the session. Now, I think Anthony did say this as we joined, but I think there's lots of people that have joined since. We'd love to know who you are in the chat. So please, let us know your company, your role in that company, and importantly, any markets that you're currently present in today. And I'm sure some of you might be already present in the US. So do let us know in the chat. But I'm going to crack on whilst you're doing that, because we've got a lot to get through. So here's today's agenda. I'm going to start by taking you through my recommended US expansion roadmap. And this is going to lay out in detail the steps I believe you should take when thinking about expanding into the US. I'm also going to share a very personal story about how US expansion can go wrong. So yeah, I've definitely got some battle scars from that one. And then I'm going to introduce you to something called the Horizon methodology and how you can use this to think about go-to-market expansion. Then we're going to cover some common pitfalls that I've seen when expanding into the US, followed by answers to some of the most common questions that I receive about US expansion. However, I'd also like to leave some time for questions that I may not have covered. So my goal is to have some time at the end for Q&A if all goes well. But also, I'm quite happy to take questions as we go through this. I'd much rather this becomes an interactive discussion rather than me just sharing slides and talking at you. So at any moment, please just feel free to pop questions that you have into the chat. I'm sure Anthony might stop me, and if we've got a kind of moment where we can cover those off, then we will do so. If not, we'll try and cover them off at the end. So that's what we're going to be covering. Let's dive in to, I suppose, start thinking about how to map out that journey from where you are today in your home territory to expanding into the US. And I'm sure we've got people in the UK, maybe people across Europe, certainly people in France, But regardless of where you are, let's think about that journey. And I suppose a lot of the principles that I'm going to cover today could apply to most expansions into new territories. But I'm focusing on the US because it is a market that I think European startups are most attracted to due to the sheer size, but also the access to top tier venture investors over there as well. I'm also focusing on it because I've seen way too many companies fail trying to conquer the US, and they generally burn through way too much capital and time trying to do this. So I said I've got a first-hand experience of this. I thought I would start by sharing a very personal story. And I'm not going to mention the company name, but I joined as a VP of sales shortly after they raised their Series A from a UK-based VC. It was a while ago now. We were probably one of I think the first investments that they'd made, or maybe the second investment that they've made. They were a new fund. I think it's fair to say that their advice wasn't always that well informed. But anyway, we had a decent product market fit and traction in the UK. We were being encouraged by our VC to expand to the US. And at this point, I think we had maybe a handful of clients in the US. I can't remember, but I think maybe 4 or 5 that somehow found us and bought our solution. Clearly very early adopters. They hadn't been clients for that long, but the pressure to grow faster from our VCs meant that the US market, being 10 times bigger than the UK, seemed really, really appealing. And I remember really well the big debate that was happening in the boardroom about how we should expand into the US. And there was lots of different views around the table. I had actually no experience of US expansion at the time, but I kind of instinctively felt that we should probably test the market out a little bit before investing too heavily. And one of our co-founders felt that he should move out there. He wasn't the CEO, he was another co-founder, that he should move out there for a few months and hire maybe a couple of sales team members in the US to support that effort to win US customers. So anyway, off he went for our first US expansion mission. And 3 months passed, and we weren't seeing the pipeline or the customer growth that we were expecting. I think our US-based co-founder started to kind of grumble about the performance of the sales reps, and I think the sales reps were grumbling around the product, missing key features that US customers wanted. And the challenge, though, was that the product and engineering team based in the UK had, a pretty full roadmap of feature requests from UK customers who, at the time, contributed most of our revenue. And I think this created just a bit of friction, probably between our co-founder, the 2 sales reps he had, and ultimately the product and engineering team. But anyway, 3 months passed further. So now 6 months down the journey, and the US was way behind where the board expected the business to be. And it was clear that our small US team also felt pretty disconnected from the UK headquarters, and that they, I think, probably lacked some support and resources from the wider business. So another 3 months passed, we're now 9 months in, and it was deemed that we hadn't invested enough into the US market or taken that market seriously enough. And we needed to now take a different approach. So at this point, our VCs made a very firm statement and encouraged us to hire a senior leadership team in the US, people who knew the market, had the right accents, had significant scaling experience. So we hired a VP of sales and a chief marketing officer in the US, but not just anywhere in the US, in Silicon Valley, of all places. Probably the most expensive part of the US for talent and office space. Now, I'm going to cover the kind of pros and cons of different US locations for hiring later on. So for now, I'm just going to continue this story. So we hired these leaders in San Francisco. They quickly built a sales and marketing team over there. 3 months later, it was clear that the US contribution to revenue was still not looking that good, especially now given the high cost base that we had. And then another quarter later, and the board was starting to actually get quite worried about this US sales performance and the team that we'd built out there. 1 more quarter and $2 million spent later, and the decision was taken to let the VP sales and the CMO go from the business, as well as the team that they'd hired. So we were back to square one, 18 months after that original US expansion effort where our co-founder went out there. Now, what went wrong? You're probably thinking, well, I think lots of things, quite frankly, but one big one was the gaps in the product for the US market. It became clear that US customers had very specific product and feature requirements that we had massively underestimated. Ultimately, I just feel like we didn't have product market fit, and there was more work to be done to localize that product in order to get there. We just hired the team way too early and probably hired the wrong people as well. So two failed attempts, $2 million wasted, and the board turned to me at that point and said, Tom, we'd like you to take on global sales and marketing. And I kicked off the third attempt at winning US customers, hopefully without breaking the bank any further. So what I'm about to talk you through now, I appreciate that's a long ramble in a story, but I think it was important context, because what I'm about to talk you through now is the approach that I took. But this approach is also one that I've seen be successful with several of ScaleWise clients too. And in my view, I think it's the best and most cost-effective way to win clients in the US and ultimately conquer that market. And there's essentially 5 stages to this roadmap that I'm about to lay out for you. I'm highlighting the key contributors for each stage and the considerations as you move through each stage as well. So I've built it up. Now I'm going to share the 5-stage roadmap. So first up, wherever you're based, and in this slide, we're going to assume you're based in the UK, you should start by initiating the journey to the US from your current base, your current headquarters. So in this example, I recommend that you take your best sales development rep and one of your best salespeople, and this could be an account exec, more likely maybe your head of sales or even your CEO if you're still early stage, and you start trying to build a pipeline of deals and customers from your base. Before I move on though, I want to just make sure that we all know what a sales development rep and account executive are. So who can tell me in the chat, what's a sales development rep? Quick knowledge test on go-to-market roles. Sales development rep, anyone know what they do? Lead gen, nice one, Gavin, absolutely. They are purely responsible for creating qualified pipeline for account execs. Who can tell me what an account exec is? What do they do? Not Gavin again, please. Someone else. Oh, Gavin, too quick. They are the closers. Yes. They are taking the qualified pipeline from the sales development rep and they are closing those deals. Now, it may seem counterintuitive to take your best SDR from your home territory and someone senior on the sales side and direct them to your new territory. But if you don't, and it doesn't work as well as you want, you'll be left wondering if it was the market that wasn't right for you or whether it was the people who were the problem. It's another reason why for earlier stage companies, it's very common for the CEO to lead this effort because it was they who created the home market from scratch. They, probably have the most experience across the entire company of building a new market for your product from the ground up. But anyway, whoever you use, these folks are going to work together to start building some hypothesis on how best to approach the market and then start testing this out from your home market. Now, it's crucial at this stage that no matter how big or successful you are in your home market, that you approach the US or whatever new market you're going after like a scrappy startup. You don't want big, elegant, all-encompassing plans that take months to put together. You want to run this like your CEO or whoever it was who did the first few deals in your home market, however they built the company in the first place. And that's by coming up with hypothesis on who to sell to and how to sell to them, and then testing these out in the field as quickly as you can, measuring all the results you're able to, and using that data to rapidly iterate on your plans. The first thing is to try and build pipelines. So map out target accounts, probably a couple of hundred to start with, map out the ideal persona profile within those accounts, and then start trying to get meetings. If you've had inbound from the US in the past that you've maybe put on the back burner, assuming they're ICP, that's also a great place to start. Or if you've got customers in the UK or in your core market who have a presence in the US or who even may be based in the US, then time to start asking for some introductions. Just don't I think don't overestimate how far those intros are going to get you. If you're lucky, they're going to get you in the room, which is great, but that may well be it. You're going to have to still do a lot of selling. And once you've mapped out your ideal customers and your ideal personas, look at what other intros you can get. Again, often it's why the CEO is the best person to do this, because they often have the best network in the company. I've usually found that intros are the way into the first few deals in any market. So your LinkedIn, your investors, your customers, your partners, whoever you can use, you need to use them to get those first few doors open for you in the US. Beyond that, you're starting from scratch, cold calling, cold emailing, LinkedIn in, however you run your outbound today. And bear in mind that you may need to change the content of your emails to reflect the US market more closely. You're probably going to need to iterate on that. Hopefully you've got some idea of how, what some of those key changes might be. If not, try and get some advice from people who've sold into similar personas in the US. And just don't forget your spelling. Lots more Zs and fewer Us when you're marketing and emailing into the US. So just a few more tactical considerations at this stage. This is still stage one. You'll probably also need to adapt your working hours to give you that biggest time zone coverage. So when I did this stage one myself, I had my SDR and my AE working a 2 p.m. till a 10 p.m. shift. Now, if you've got good potential market on the East Coast, it can be a good option to start there, as you're going to have that wider overlap. And whoever you bring into this project, you're probably going to need to work out different targets and commission plans for them to reflect just the immaturity of your go-to-market in the US. You may want to offer them a higher rate of commission too, perhaps, or focus this commission on winning new logos and ultimately internalizing those market learnings into the wider business. A higher commission rate, I think, can also just help to sweeten the working hours a little. It can be quite hard working that 2 till 10 shift when there's others that aren't in the office. And I think don't ask someone to do that every evening of the week, because it will get boring really quickly, maybe 2 or 3 days a week, and then build from there. But whoever's working on this project should also change their LinkedIn profile to make it look like they're in the US, as this is going to help if people decide to check you out. Also put some sort of US address on your website so it looks like you have operations there. Even if it is the US address of your law firm, maybe you can use a virtual office service or mail forwarding services. They're pretty cheap to set up, so you can establish a presence in the US without the need for full incorporation. And to be clear though, at this stage, I don't believe it's essential to incorporate in the US. Fake it till you make it at this point. You're still learning, you're still iterating, and you're doing it in a scrappy way. Now, I'll talk about how to think about resource allocation in a moment, but for now, the goal is to get meetings, run discovery calls, learn as much as you can about what's working and what isn't as quickly as possible. Measure all your metrics from email open, response rate, meetings booked, qualified ops to close rate, and just continue to optimize what you're doing and internalizing that feedback as you start to close deals. I'm going to take a quick pause before I move to stage 2, just to see if we've got any questions in the chat. So someone has said here, where are we? I did see it. Couldn't these 2 roles be done by the same person? So Ilan, sorry if I haven't got your name correctly there. I think they can if you've got an AE that is particularly good at generating pipeline, and you're open to the typical feast and famine that can sometimes happen when you have an AE that's doing the full cycle of that sales process. Because what often tends to happen is they spend a good period of time to start with building pipeline in the US, then they've got enough pipeline, now they're closing that pipeline, they stop building pipeline, and then they've got to go back to building it again. So you have this kind of very lumpy revenue. I think you can get learnings more quickly, assuming you've got the resource to do it, if you get, even if it's just a proportion of your SDR's time and a proportion of your AE. So you've just split those roles and you've got them both focused on the things that hopefully they're best at. Hopefully that answers your question. Ben, is there not a research phase before this stage 1 where you consult with US consultants, target customers, potential partners? Yeah, I think Ben, there maybe is. I think it depends on how much resources you've got and how serious you are about going into the US. I certainly think advisors can be great, and I'll talk about one that I think is particularly good later in the webinar. They can also be expensive. I think that actually getting support from someone that really understands the US market, that from a go-to-market standpoint, is really useful. We've done that actually with quite a few of our ScaleWise clients. We have experts in the US and across Europe, and they've just paid for coaching hours and mentoring hours with that person to help them get the lay of the land. So I think there is different ways of doing it depending on your budget and how serious you are. But I also think you can do a lot of learning and iteration just by doing this stage one as well, and build out your hypothesis. Jane, more questions coming in. I'm going to come back to them if that's okay, Noel and Jean. I'm going to get to stage two, and I will keep stopping as we go. So once you do start to close deals, you've got to get case studies out quickly as you can. You make sure guaranteed case studies are in your contracts as a default clause if you don't have that already. Then as soon as you close deals, start referring to these deals in your sales motions, put case studies in your sales decks, and refer to them in your meetings to give your prospects the comfort of US-based social proof. It's so, so important to have that social proof. Going to the US and saying, hey, look at our wonderful client base in the UK. It's not going to work with US customers. You need that social proof. I appreciate it might take you a while to have kind of clear ROI metrics for those customers in the US, but you can create initial case studies that simply refer to the challenges you're solving with those new customers. Obviously, as soon as you get those really compelling ROI metrics, which are really important, that show that tangible value you've delivered to US customers, get those case studies updated with that data. And on that point, you'll want to over-service your initial US customers because the value they create, the ROI they receive, is going to be the foundation for your next phase of growth in the US. You may also need these as your early kind of reference call customers for further prospects in the US. So when a prospect says, hey, I'd like to speak to a couple of US customers, you need to do whatever you can to make sure those first few customers you're on board have an amazing experience. They see tangible value and they're willing to do those reference calls with you. So overinvest, I think, in that. It doesn't matter right now if none of this is in any way scalable, the sales motion or the customer success motion, you're still at the point of working out what works, not making it repeatable and predictable. You will, like with the sales motion, want to put your best CS person on these new customers. I think that the same thing applies. You need to de-risk the person element of the new venture. So put the best person on it, involve them in creating the strategy. Same goes for the sales side. And also if you need them to work evenings or be on calls late in the day, I think just pay them a bit extra for it in whatever way you can. Don't expect they're going to do it out of the goodness of their hearts. You might have really committed team members, but like, trust me, it can get quite boring and painful for people. So do try and sweeten it for them, as I said earlier. And get your product team involved early with these customers as well. They should start attending meetings in the sales cycle if there's good stuff to be learned from these early meetings. This was, I think, a big mistake that we made in our first failed expansion effort. Make sure your product team gets involved in both the sales and the CS motions early. Obviously, if there are product changes you already know you need to make to get into the US, they'll already be working on those, hopefully, but it can be a really powerful motivator, I think, for a product team if they're also hearing live firsthand, from customers how they're receiving the product. So we've unpacked quite a bit there in those first two steps. So I'm going to pause.
Tom, can I hop in? Can I hop in with a couple of observations and a question? So I loved your mention about making the website US flavor without the U, making sure there are no pound symbols, they're all dollar symbols. I mean, those things are key. And when we launched SeedLegals in France, a key thing for me was the French saw it as a French SeedLegals. No, les Anglais have come over here, and which then leads to an interesting other thing, which is your UK site, which you might have started, might be filled with content that is designed for the UK. It might mention London people or London customers, whatever it might be. So the question to you is, and then I'll tell you what we did, is should you try to, number one, replicate all content, which will be a massive amount of trouble to make a US version. Number two, should you have the US version that kind of has some pages that are designed for US and then just filled with all the others that are UK? Or should you have a different US proposition that is a small but perfectly formed subset of your site, and the US folks only see that, even though you've got a lot more? Maybe only some of your products are for the US market. So tell me what you think, and then I'll tell you what we did.
My view is the last option there, Anthony. I think it's a huge effort to overhaul your whole website and to make it US-centric. I think small and perfectly formed is perfectly adequate when you are doing this level of kind of testing and of hypothesis and trying to keep it relatively scrappy. I don't know what you did at SeedLegals, but that would be my advice.
All right. Well, I'm delighted to say that's exactly what we did. And the thinking was it's better that people see a subset of your offering that is perfectly formed, that you can support, and that it doesn't lead them to want all these other things that they just can't have because you haven't put it in their market yet. So even if you've got, 100 articles and so on, and that this new audience won't see, it's better than trying to explain which things are relevant to them and which are not. Okay. So now the next question is, if you do have a homepage that is, in the UK, you've got pound symbols, your insurance, we're going to save you pounds and so on. And now your US one obviously needs to be completely dollars and no mention of pounds. It needs to feel to your American audience that you are as US as anyone that lives in Texas. How do you not alienate your existing customers? You probably need two versions of your homepage and website, and then you need geo-targeting. And I'll tell you what we did. But before that, maybe if we aren't covering it further, what technologies might you use for your website to geo-target and so on?
Yeah, I can't speak to geo-targeting on websites, and I'm sure the technology has evolved a lot from 10 years ago when I first had my failed expansion effort. I'm sure, Anthony, you can probably provide more recommendations on geo-targeting tech than I can.
All right, good. Well, then I'll tell you the answer, so you don't need to spend time on it, which is we use WordPress for our public website. There's MaxMind, I think, which is a database, which is GeoLookup. It's available as a WordPress plugin, so you can have people in each country seeing a version of your website. It takes a bit of effort to set up. We were unable to do that in Squarespace, Webform, or other CMSs, but WordPress, love it or hate it, lets you do all of those things. So we have different versions of our website for each territory. Anyone coming from that territory will automatically get directed to the right version for them. And then to allow you to switch sites, mostly, in fact, so that we can easily test without having to use a VPN, which is important, the little country flag, so we can set Ireland or France and so on, and see that version of the site, which also means that, if someone happens to find an article on Google that takes them to the other site, because it's a French article or something in our case, they can still find their way back again or jump back to it. So that's the short piece on geo-targeting your website, and then you can create those small and perfectly formed variants or alternative versions of your WordPress site. And if you have any questions on that, I can connect you with our team that did that, because a bit of work is needed to set it up. All right, back to you. Thank you.
Back to me. I know there's more questions coming in the chat. I'm going to get through this slide and then I'm going to try and cover some of those off. So stage 3 is all about taking that scrappy go-to-market effort and making it more repeatable and predictable. At this point, your key contributors are still in the UK or your core market, but you're looking to achieve a level of consistency in their performance that can give you the confidence you need to start building out that initial team in the US. And by this point, you should be, I suppose, much clearer on your ICP, your ideal persona in the US, and combining this with hopefully an increasing number of good case studies, you should be getting hopefully some more traction. And repeatability could be measured in different ways, but I don't think it's worth kind of overcomplicating this. You can see a couple of simple measures on the slide here. So essentially, is your SDR hitting their target relatively consistently? And does your US focused AE have a win rate on qualified opportunities of at least 20%? And perhaps look at this on a cohort basis over maybe the course of 2 or 3 months, depending on your sales cycle. And then another key part of step 3 is developing a strong SDR and AE onboarding process if you don't already have one. And in fact, even if you do have one, it's probably going to need to be improved or maybe adapted to support the onboarding of reps in the US when you do eventually hire there. So effective onboarding of reps is a massive topic in itself. I do a whole workshop on that topic in itself. But 3 things you should certainly include are, firstly, a good amount of time should be spent with existing customers so reps can deeply understand their worlds, their day-to-day challenges, and how their solution solves those challenges. Kind of over-index on that, I think, versus product knowledge in the first few weeks. Secondly, I'd encourage lots of role plays and ideally certifications for different phases of the sales process. So break down the component parts of the sales cycle. So cold calling, cold email, discovery, demo, stakeholder management, negotiation, closing, and just ensure you have an up-to-date playbook that details the best practices at each of those stages. Then through a combination of call recordings, role plays, ride-alongs, ensure reps are able to demonstrate competence before then assessing their skills via kind of what I call scorecards. So that onboarding piece, using role plays, is really important. And then, of course, number 3 is product knowledge, but based around specific personas and use cases, rather than teaching about features and functions. They need to be able to effectively demo solutions to specific persona problems. And they also need to understand how your product is used by real customers. So again, time with live customers is really key. So again, onboarding, really thinking about how you're going to onboard those new reps that you hire effectively and efficiently. So now on to stage 4, when we're finally hiring in the US. And one of the reasons why we're waiting until this point is that the cost and hassle of setting up a US entity, adhering to US employment laws, their regulations, their crazy tax system, means that you really want to make sure that you have product market fit over there. And I think a repeatable way of acquiring new customers before you invest in all that stuff. If not, you can waste a lot of time, a lot of money, as we did in our second failed mission, only to then have to kind of retrench. But as the slide suggests, now's the time to hire an SDR and an AE in the US, perhaps even 2 of each, if you have the budget and the kind of traction over there. Personally, I'm always a big fan of hiring 2 at a time for a couple of reasons. So firstly, if you only hire 1 person, you won't be sure whether any underperformance is down to them, or if there's some other problem with the market or territory. Hiring 2 at the same time, especially if they have slightly different profiles, can just help to mitigate this a little bit, also provide some healthy competition between the 2 of them. The second reason for hiring 2 at a time relates to the first consideration you can see on the slide here. So we suggest that you bring any new hires to the UK or your core market for 3 or 4 weeks of onboarding. And it can be much more time and cost efficient to bring over multiple people, as your onboarding efforts can then be one-to-many, but you can also save costs and kind of build relationships in that new team by putting them all up in an Airbnb house together, which is what we ended up doing when we brought the kind of initial US team over, and that helped to build those relationships, those bonds. So just a more cost-effective way of doing it. Another key consideration is the type of experience you're looking for in these new hires. Our recommendation is always to find reps who have experience at your stage of business, but also your average deal size or complexity of sale. This is, I think, less important than, or should I say more important than industry experience in my view. Also, it can be a real bonus if you can find reps who have worked for companies where the headquarters is outside of the US. They're going to be much more familiar with the challenges that this is going to bring, and they're going to be more likely to stick around when they face those challenges of being separated from the HQ. And then finally, in step 4, the real goal is about getting these new hires in the US to reach repeatability with their performance. A common mistake as well is to assume that this is going to happen as quickly as you found repeatability when you were selling from your core market. However, the reality, I think, can be quite different, because you don't, I suppose, just don't forget that you had your best reps focusing on the US. They probably had deep experience of your company, your ICP, and your product. They also had their manager on their time zone, or perhaps even sat next to their manager. In stage 4, your US reps manager could still be in the UK. In fact, I'd probably encourage that you don't hire an expensive leader in the US yet until stage 5, which is what we're going to discuss now. So that's stage 4. And then finally, stage 5, you now have productive reps in the US creating repeatable revenue growth. Now is the time to hire leadership in the US. The first hire should probably be a head of or a VP of sales, so that your reps have that local support, but also so this person can start to build out the team. Because if you really have reached product market fit, now is the time to scale that tight team. However, and this is a big consideration. You should only hire AEs in concert with growing demand. And I'm going to repeat that because it is so important. You should only hire AEs in concert with growing demand. And what do I mean by this? Well, the opposite of this is building a headcount-driven revenue model that assumes that you can hit a certain revenue target simply by multiplying the number of newly hired reps that you plan to hire. You multiply that by that quota. I have never seen this work out, especially in a new market. What you need to do is ensure that you're able to build sufficient demand in that market first before hiring all those reps. Now, if SDRs are key to your demand gen strategy, then make sure you're hiring SDRs in tandem, perhaps even before your AEs. Or maybe if you know that inbound marketing or events maybe is a key part of your demand gen, make sure you build this capacity either in the UK or US before building out your sales team in the US. And a final word of caution here. Even if you think the US might end up being your core market and that you might move your HQ there, now is not the time to hire very senior revenue leaders out there. Find someone who can be scrappy, someone who can manage a small team, get in the trenches with that team, do deals, and who has the experience of doing this at your stage of business. Ideally, as I said, for a company outside of the US, but that's not essential. But you're looking for that more player manager type rather than that senior leader. Okay, we've covered a lot on this slide across the 5 stages. I'm going to turn my attention to the chat and see if there's some questions here that I can answer. So, Noel says, are there any people we can speak to that can link us to early adopters? Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, Noel, as in kind of sales agents. I'm a little bit dubious about sales agents that work on a referral-only basis that will claim to introduce you to early adopters in your market. I rarely see that work well. What I see work better is value-added reseller or channel partners that sell already a product or solution into your target persona, and they see your product as a really valuable extra tool in their kit bag that can help to create stickiness with their customer base, help drive more value as well for them. Those kind of partnerships can work quite well. I've seen them work in the past if you find the right ones. Gene, it's one thing doing sales dev out the UK, but if you're a scrappy SaaS startup piloting a new software product, you're going to be facing all kinds of teething issues. We need to jump on it immediately and restore credibility. Any thoughts on how to support the launch of an app software product? Well, I wouldn't be launching my app or software product in the US if I hadn't figured out how to do that in my core market, as I've explained here. Like, build that capability internally, know how to do it over here. And then, yes, of course, you're going to have to lean into that new market. You're going to have to jump on the call where you need to. You're going to have to provide probably quick solutions to problems as they crop up, and you're going to probably have to overservice, as I said earlier, those first few customers, both from maybe a technical sales standpoint, but also from a customer success standpoint. So hopefully that answers your question as well there. Gene, Sabine, cannot the new customers reject the new information published in the case study? Okay, so I think what you're saying here, Sabine, is what about those customers that say that they don't want a case study? It's going to happen. My default is to always put in my contract that we have the ability to write a case study. They can always, when they're negotiating terms, take that out. Very rarely do people do that, I found. If they do take it out, that's absolutely fine. It might be for confidential reasons, but just try and get as many as you can, Sabine, I would say, in those early days. Shahid, do US customers expect different, i.e. much higher levels of service compared to the UK? I don't think they do. I think they expect a different type of sales approach, and I'll talk about this in a little while in terms of how you sell to them, how they want to be sold to. But I don't see that they are particularly more needy as it relates to service. But I do think you should be over-servicing your first few customers out there anyway. What are your thoughts on using US-based sales agencies? I think I answered that one. Yeah, on the ground, Avnish. Let me know if you've got any more questions on that. Our fintech startup, says Ryan, is better enter the US market as soon as possible or wait until Series A? Ryan, if you're at seed stage that suggests to me that you probably haven't got product market fit yet in your core market. I would really caution you against expanding into the US or any new market for that matter until you've found some level of product market fit in your new market. If you're a more progressed, mature, established seed stage business that just happens to have not needed funding up to that point, and you have product market fit in your core market, and you can start to devote some of this go-to-market resource to a new market, absolutely do it. Don't need to wait for the Series A. But as I say, what I typically see is seed stage is too early to do this.
I'm going to hop in. Sorry, Tom, I'll hop in right there. So, a really fascinating set of questions on the timing. And there is, excellent advice from Octopus Ventures on, we basically say, go early or go late, but don't go in the middle, which is, if it's two founders, get on a plane, find a garage in Palo Alto, do, as others have done before, or, get to product market fit and significant revenue in the UK. So you've got a mature product and your team can now focus on replicating that elsewhere without having to do two things in parallel. So that usually is Series A and beyond. And also where you've got the capital reserves that you can spend or lose a few million on a US proposition without it killing the company. But what you want to avoid is that you are still building features that are necessary to get product market fit, and your customers are demanding in one territory while trying to get resources to do two, or trying to build for both each new feature in two ways at the same time. Now, this is going to vary a lot depending on how different your product is between markets. If it turns out to be a social network, it's going to be, pretty much identical, but it may turn out that, it's an insurance product, or in our case, a legal tech product, and the laws and the product offering and the partner integrations with your banks or whatever else you're connecting with are vastly different. So I like the go early or go late proposition.
And I think if you just add to that, Anthony, if you're going to go early, I think there needs to be a really compelling reason why you're going early and not focusing on your core market. And that might be because actually, you've raised a huge amount of money and actually it makes sense to go and target the US market. It might be that there's investors over there that are going to be really warm to your type of proposition, and you see that as being a core part of your strategy, raising from US investors. Or it might just be that the US market has the highest concentration of your target buyer, your target persona, and actually it just makes sense for you to start there. But I would still, word of caution, setting up in a garage, going out to Silicon Valley or whatever, it's still hard. It's going to be hard. Without doubt.
Okay. So the other thing is, which we've seen, and again, it'll vary depending on the market you're in, but sometimes the US isn't one country. It's 50 states, and they're all different. You've got different employment laws. There has to be a resource, which I haven't really found, that explains all the things. So, from what I've seen, you'll always incorporate in Delaware, but then no one actually lives in Delaware. So you're going to have a sales team based perhaps on where your market is, or it could be in a city that's attractive and or inexpensive to hire. You don't want to be hiring developers in San Francisco because you'll get bankrupted very quickly. And
I'm going to come on to this, actually, Anthony. I'm going to talk about the various pros and cons of hiring in different places. So, let me jump back in and see if we can make sure we get to that point. So we're going to look at how to think about the resource allocation as a management tool for thinking about how to make this journey. So I'm going to talk you through something called the 3 Horizon methodology. It originated from McKinsey. It's a great tool to think about how to manage resources as you expand into new markets. In fact, you can use this same methodology to expand into any market, whether a new product or a new sector as well. But the first thing is Horizon 1. This is the machine that's creating your revenue today, all the way from lead gen to renewal and customer expansion, including your product team as well. Horizon 1 is all about running a revenue machine with predictability and repeatability. It's essentially your core market. I put a percentage of how much your company resources should be dedicated to this horizon. These numbers aren't fixed. They're really for you to think about how much you want to kind of spend in each horizon. But generally, Horizon 1 is the vast majority of your organizational resources. And the key to Horizon 1, it's the current revenue machine, as predictable and repeatable as you can make it. And it's sacred. It's like the business's crown jewels hidden behind glass and untouchable. So you don't ever want to mess too much with Horizon 1. And then next up is Horizon 2. That's the new thing. It's where you're trying to grow into today to start delivering revenue tomorrow. This is all about experimentation and iteration. This could be the US for you, where you're trying out new things and seeing what works. And you can see how much smaller the resource allocation is here. Again, somewhat of an arbitrary number, but something for you to think about. And this is where you're back to working like a freshly minted startup, investigating the market, building pipeline, trying to get deals done, improving and iterating as you go. And the key to this methodology is that you've got very clearly defined success criteria for anything you're working on in Horizon 2 in order for it to move into Horizon 1, where it becomes part of your core revenue generation machine, where repeatability and predictability are key. And we're going to get onto what that criteria might look like in a moment. And then you have Horizon 3. This is where the business is looking at much longer term growth, bigger bets in the future, perhaps new products, totally different markets, much longer term thinking. These are higher risk bets that you're willing to make with even a smaller amount of company resources. And again, you're going to have a clear criteria for moving something from Horizon 3 to Horizon 2. But let's take a look at what this Horizon methodology might look like, specifically in terms of moving from the UK to the US. So in Horizon 1, your revenue machine that's working today, let's say you're selling your main product in the UK to 4 main sectors. It's kind of vertical industries. And in addition to that, you've got both mid-market and enterprise companies that you're selling to. Now, you could, for example, say that for Horizon 2, you're going to sell the same product, but to the US East Coast companies, just into 2 of your 4 sectors, because you've got a hypothesis that these will be the strongest sectors for you in that new market. And also, you're only going to focus on mid-market rather than enterprise, because again, you have a hypothesis that this is going to get you more traction more quickly. And then Horizon 3, that could be any number of different dimensions, perhaps selling to the rest of the US, or you could perhaps be exploring different sectors. But here we've shown it as essentially the same geography as East Coast and sectors as Horizon 2, but enterprise prospects, because now they'll have much longer sales cycles, but could also be game-changing if you win them. So let's look at what that criteria of moving from different horizons might be. And again, these are just examples. You need to work out for yourselves what the exact criteria might be for you. But for example, the criteria for moving between Horizon 2 and 1 might be that for either of the sectors to be moved into Horizon 1, you need to have generated a qualified pipeline of more than 200K and have closed 5 new deals of greater than 30K ACV. And once you've reached that benchmark, we can start allocating more resource from Horizon 1, or more likely, hire reps or give more resources from Horizon 1 to focus on your Horizon 2. Now, you might start building a pipeline of reps that you might hire maybe in the UK or the US, but you can't pull the trigger on hiring these reps and move them into the team until you hit that criteria. Now, the other alternative, which I've seen work quite well, is that you direct one of your existing reps to the new market and then you backfill them in the UK as well, which is kind of my point with the roadmap. And then you have criteria for moving from H3 to H2, and that might be a certain number of enterprise POCs, so proof of concepts, again with a minimum value. Then in terms of resource allocation, you might decide that you're going to allocate your best SDR to the US, maybe 2 days per week of your VP sales time, or perhaps your best account exec, and maybe even a day a week of your CS leaders time. And this would effectively be that initial team working on the new territory. If you already have some traction in the US or maybe more inbound, you might decide to increase these numbers. But bearing in mind, this is an expedition force. This is the Marines. It's not the army in thinking about that analogy. This is still very much stages 2 and 3 from that roadmap on my previous slide, where you're trying to build repeatability and predictability from your base. And then for Horizon 3, this is maybe just the CEO working a day a week to try and spin up some proof of concepts with enterprise customers, using all their knowledge and connections to make this happen. Like I said, these numbers are all just placeholders to give you something to think about. You'll have to work with your management team to see exactly how you want to structure this. But I like this type of methodology for a few reasons. So firstly, it forces you to go step by step. I've seen attempts to expand into the US where the company wants to try and sell something, I suppose try to sell all of the same sorts of companies that they sell to in the UK all at the same time, which I think may feel like a strategy that's going to give you more success. But the reality is that the narrower you can be, the more focused on a target set of accounts, the faster you can iterate what's working and what isn't, and the more successful you're likely to be. If you haven't, by the way, read Geoffrey Moore's book, Crossing the Chasm, I highly recommend you put that to the top of your reading list, because the Crossing the Chasm strategy is as good for expanding into new markets as it is for kind of creating your original ICP and customer base in your first market as well. So definitely Crossing the Chasm by Geoffrey Moore. The other reason why I like this methodology is it doesn't mess with your core revenue machine. You need to keep that sacred. So it's a strategy that allows you to expand into new markets without much risk on your current revenue and, of course, cost base. And number three is that it forces you to build up some traction and pipeline before you even consider hiring anyone new, which is very important in my view. So lots that we've covered there. I'll pause for a quick moment just to see, Aravind, I love it when people answer questions in the chat that I don't have to answer. So thank you very much. POC is proof of concept. Ben, 5% and 1% might seem very small. Very small for a very good reason. You are experimenting. This is a scrappy startup. You have to keep your core market as your sacred, resource, your revenue machine. At this stage, you are just experimenting. You need to keep costs low. Of course, it might be 8%. It could be 8 and 2. You need to figure out what you're willing to risk, how big this bet is worth for you, because it is a gamble in these early stages. So keep the focus of your resources on your core market, in my view. Right, I'm mindful of time. I'm gonna actually skip through common pitfalls when expanding, and I am going to go straight to well, you can see the common pitfalls. I'm not going to talk through them, but they're all pitfalls that I've faced, I think, in the past. I'm going to go straight to common questions, because these are some of the common questions that I receive about expanding into the US, and I want to make sure we cover them off. And there may even be additional questions that I want to give time for at the end as well. So let's kick off. So when should I expand into the US? We've kind of covered this off. I don't think there's a straight answer to this, because it will depend on a few factors, such as how much investment you've taken on, whether you have a real pull from the US market and the investor community over there. But my strong view, as you've probably gathered by now, is you should have strong product market fit in your core market, in a revenue machine in that core market that's repeatable and predictable. Too many companies expand too soon, thinking that they need to do that in order to accelerate their revenue growth. My view is that's normally much more, there's normally much more market share in your core market than you think. Unless you've saturated your core market, you've got 20, 30%, I would say double down, keep working on your core market until you really need to expand. Other thing I'd say is that startups often think that expanding into the US is going to create a more compelling story for potential investors. And that might be the case if you're committed to raising from US VCs. But I would say that you need to be really careful about assuming that European investors are going to buy into your US expansion narrative as a positive thing. They actually may well see it as a risky and expensive gamble if you're trying to do it too soon. So just be cautious about selling that US expansion narrative too early and thinking that investors are going to like it. Maybe sound out different investors, see how they view the US market, and just play your cards wisely on that investor story. Should I incorporate in the US, and in which state should I incorporate in? Well, Anthony has probably answered this question to a degree on this, because he talked about Delaware. My view on incorporating in the US is that companies generally do it too soon because they hire employees in the US too soon. And once you've hired employees in the US, you need to employ them via your US subsidiary, because if you've got employees in the US, you create a tax presence there, and your UK company can then get sued if you have them working through your UK company. You could avoid this by hiring contractors in the US through your UK company, but there's also risks and challenges to this. So my counsel would be on this to seek professional advice, and I can recommend someone in a moment. In terms of choosing the right state for incorporating your company, I think this does depend on various factors, including your business goals and your industry and operational preferences. Delaware is often considered the default choice for startups because it's got very business-friendly laws. It's got an established legal framework. Also, many VCs prefer Delaware corporations, so it may make it easier to attract investment. And Delaware also has, I think, more flexible and well-established corporate laws too. But there's also states like Nevada, well known for its kind of favorable tax environment, especially for businesses with no physical presence there. Texas has become, pretty popular, growing tech scene. But I think more broadly, Delaware is the place to go. But seek some legal advice on that. Should I create an LLC or a C Corp? Again, I think this depends on various factors, including your goals, your structure, your funding plans, your long-term strategy. Generally speaking, the C Corp is the best route to go down. C Corps are often more attractive to VCs and institutional investors because the structure kind of allows for multiple classes of stock and more complex financing structures. C Corps are also well suited for implementing stock option plans or ESOPs, as they're called in the US, employee stock ownership plans. And C Corps can provide certain tax deductions and benefits that may not be available to LLCs. But I would say, as always with these things, I'm not an expert legal advisor. Seek some legal advice. I've got a recommendation for that on the next slide as well. Where should you hire people in the US? I said I'd come to this. So not in San Francisco, I would say. The cost of living, the competition for talent, time zone differences make it really challenging. Austin in Texas has become a very popular choice for a lot of startups over the last decade. A place that I've heard great things about also is Raleigh in North Carolina. It's on the East Coast, so you get more overlap with the European time zone. But it's also becoming a real tech hub. So it's part of what's called the Research Triangle region, which is known for a really good concentration of tech companies, research institutions, a lot of startups there now, good universities. This means that it's got, I suppose, a vibrant ecosystem that can provide really good networking opportunities. There's good talent there. Compared to some other tech hubs like Silicon Valley or New York, it also has a lower cost of living. I think it also consistently ranks as high in terms of quality of life. And finally, it's got kind of business-friendly policies. It's kind of recognized for being supportive for startups and entrepreneurs. So check out Raleigh in North Carolina. And then what roles should you hire? Well, my view on this is that it probably makes sense to keep your product and engineering teams in your home market and focus on building your customer-facing teams in the US. I'd certainly invest in customer success and support in the US as soon as you can, so that your US customers have someone on their time zone who they can kind of pick up the phone to when they need help. Salespeople, of course, as I said, are going to be needed. But as I laid out in my roadmap, you should only be hiring these in the US when you've shown some repeatability selling into the US from your core market. Also, as I touched on in the roadmap, when you reach stage 5, it's time to start layering on further hires, perhaps managers. I'd be thinking about hiring marketing people in the US. To start with, I'd probably go with a marketing generalist who can kind of adapt your home marketing efforts to the US market, because it's likely you're going to need, I suppose, to market to US customers in a slightly different way. And so having someone in territory who knows how to do this often makes sense. Depending on your ICP, you may want field marketing support or perhaps ABM, but this will be dependent on your own business. So the type of marketing person you're going to hire will be determined by that. I would, as I said, avoid hiring expensive VP and C-level marketing leaders in the US until you're really ready to invest in scaling over there. And then what are salary benchmarks? Well, a lot lower in Raleigh than San Francisco. So broadly, an SDR, you're talking about 35K to 50K in somewhere like Raleigh, plus a bit of bonus. An AE, somewhere like 60K to 80K in Raleigh, normally is a base salary with double that as an OTE. I mean, you could double that if they're in San Francisco. CSM, so customer success, you're probably looking at somewhere in the region of 50K to 90K in Raleigh, more like 80 to 120K in San Francisco. And then the head of marketing and the head of sales, you're probably looking at 100 to 160K in somewhere like Raleigh and a lot more in somewhere like San Francisco. So quickly, my last slide. I'm a big fan of leaning on experts for things like US expansion. High stakes, high risk initiatives easily go wrong. I said I recommend a great legal advisor, Dan Glazer. He leads the UK practice of Wilson Sonsini. He's brilliant. He knows his stuff. But also Scalewise are here to support you too. We've got lots of brilliantly experienced go-to-market experts who have the battle scars and available to support you with US expansion efforts, either as a mentor, but we also have what we call fractional leaders in the US who can work part-time through us to support your go-to-market efforts out there. And we've helped a few clients this way, and it's a great way of just having experienced boots on the ground without needing to employ or incorporate out there. And you can get someone who perhaps you wouldn't normally be able to afford on a full-time basis, but who can add a huge amount of value for a fraction of the cost of hiring them full-time. So yeah, contact me, tom@scalewise.com, if you want to learn more about that. Wow. I had to speed up there just to make sure we covered those questions. Do we have any in the chat? I'm happy to stick around if need be, but I know lots of you will probably have a hard stop. Thank you.
So, Tom, that was amazing. That was an amazing brain dump. I'm also delighted that as I think about US expansion, our thinking after circuitous path is remarkably similar to the things that you suggested here. I wish I'd seen this video months earlier. I do like the 1%, 5% starting off. Your talk was prescient. Today, as CEO, I spent time with a potential customer on a call, and I think I've got our first US customer. I now need to figure out how to build it, which is the next problem. But, you know, I like that exact 1% piece. And, you know, the common problem that you keep hearing is hiring senior people way too soon. I hope I'm not going to fall into that trap. We'll see. And the salaries in the US are insane. So trying to avoid hiring there first is important. So I've put the salaries, because I think someone earlier said, can you put the salaries into the chat? So you can see them there. So hopefully that makes sense. There's a lot of data there, but it's basically saying SDR, SF is San Francisco, 50 to 80K base. Austin, you can see 40 to 60. Raleigh, 35 to 50. And then you can see the same for AEs, CSMs, head of marketing, head of sales. So hopefully that is helpful for you all. All right. So thank you, everyone. This recording will be available. So if you didn't catch everything now, it will still be there. Any last question before we wrap up? Otherwise, it's a wrap. All right. Everyone, if you're looking to expand to the US, please contact Tom, who's clearly the expert and is going to save you millions in making mistakes and get you there faster. Thank you so much, Tom, and good talking. Thanks, everyone.
Really enjoyed it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.